Peace, y'all. So I was building with somebody on a post not too long ago, and they brought up this point. That this is a point I hear all the time too. People always say this when I get to saying we're African, and those are our people, whatever. And a lot of people will say, well, listen, those aren't even. When you go to Africa, Africans don't even mess with us like that. Or Africans don't, the Africans, they always generalize them as, the Africans don't even mess with us, and they don't even accept you, and you don't even know your original culture, so how are you African? But the thing is, there's a few reasons that's a erroneous point. First of all, that's not even true in a lot of cases. There are plenty of continental African people that do mess with us, so-called mess with us. There are plenty of them that do understand that we're all Africans and are just fine. But for the ones that aren't, because there are some that may not want to accept you. There are some that may feel that because they have an unbroken lineage and cultural connection to their past, because it's been handed down to them. For us it has been broken. Even to those people, I would still say that you can't base the fact that you're an African based on what a continental African thinks. For one main reason, you are an African. Okay, you're just as African as they are. So just because the opinion of a few idiots that may think that doesn't change what you're doing. And a lot of people say, oh, okay, well, you can say you have an African heritage. You can say, hey, you used to know, you may have known the culture, you may know where you're from, but you don't know the culture. You don't have an African culture. So how can you say that you're an African when you don't even have an African culture? African American culture is an African culture. Okay. That makes no sense. That would be like me saying because you're from Nigeria and you've been in Nigeria for 1,000 years, and we're here in Kemet or Egypt, and we've been here for 1,000 years, and this predated that, and we're this far apart. You don't count because you've been doing your African culture over here and I've been doing my African culture over there. Just because we came up with something different, the only thing that makes something African culture is the fact that it's African people who created it. You understand that? So because it's a culture that we had created and things that we did, a lot of people will say, well, you're under white people, but we still have a unique things that we do. So you can't tell me, no matter who you are, nobody could ever take away the fact that you're African, because it's in your blood. It's your blood right. It's your birthright. You understand? You're African. You have that same thing in the genes just like they do. So don't ever let anybody say the Africans don't mess with us. First of all, it's not even true. And second of all, you are African. You do have an African culture. It just happens to be different than theirs. Is it broken away from some of the old ways? Yes, it is. But that's so what? It's still an African culture. Because if you look at the African culture of today, wherever you're looking, anywhere on the continent today, well, we could say Nigeria, it's different now than it was 2,000 years before. No, nevertheless, even though it has changed, and the people that are there now were the ones who chose to change it, and they still continue to change it. Even though it has changed, it's still African culture. You know what I mean? And you can't base your identity off the fact that a certain person doesn't want to accept you. That would be like saying you're not a black American because, a lot of us grew up in gang neighborhoods. That would be similar to saying because you grew up and you're a blood and this person's a Crip and they don't accept you and they say they want to kill you, you're not a black American because one ignorant person doesn't like you. All right. But that was really the main point that I wanted to just get out of this, that, I think a lot of us, when we don't want to say we're African, a lot of people say, well, I'm an American, I'm not an African. I think a lot of us don't have the insight to understand that just because you're over here, you're still just as African as anybody else on the planet, and you don't have to prove to anyone, no matter where they are, who they are, where they're from, or what level of culture and what level of knowledge and understanding they have. It doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? We had people, Harriet Tubman probably didn't know a lot of the old history unless it was passed down to her. But she's still, what are you going to say? She's not African based on something that she didn't know? You know, there's someone probably that's on the continent that doesn't have access to the right information and knowledge and education because they don't know something. Are they not no longer an African? Or is a person being an African something that's limited to a certain space? You have to be in a certain space for a certain amount of time to be an African. That couldn't be true because you have African people, continental Africans, you know, I call them continental Africans, that came from over there, that moved to over here. And everybody still identifies them as that. So, but that's really all I wanted to just put out there, man. Black American culture is African culture. You are an African person. You don't have to prove nothing to nobody from nowhere, including continental Africans, on what you are and what your culture is and what your bloodline and cultural heritage is. But yeah, that's it. Peace.